Let me tell you about the time my wife Emma and I bought what we thought was the house of our dreams. Our mistake, we would realize too late, was not motivated by curiosity or a desire for adventure. It was necessity, the need for a fresh start, away from the dark memories of our old apartment, where the walls seemed to close in on us after the loss we faced. A loss so profound that I'd rather not detail it, but know that it left our hearts heavy and our lives discolored. Back then, we stumbled across an advertisement for an old house for sale in a hidden village in the UK. The price was surprisingly affordable for its size and historic beauty. It was as if something or someone was beckoning us there. The realtor, with his cautious smile, mentioned in passing the rumors about the house's past. Rumors that, in our eagerness to start over, we chose to ignore. The house was magnificent, with its imposing stone walls and wild garden that seemed to hide secrets in every corner. Through its dusty windows, the sunlight filtered through in an almost magical way. During our visit, something about the house called to us. It was as if we could feel the vibration of ancient stories in the walls, whispers from the past that were just waiting to be discovered. We were seduced by its beauty, its promise of isolation and renewal. It was then that we made our decision, ignoring the instinctive signs of danger. When we finally moved in, we were full of plans. We thought about renovations, about bringing the house back to its former glory, and how it would be the remedy for our pain. The first night, however, turned out to be a prelude to the horror that was to come. Unexplained sounds drifted through the long, dark corridors as if the house was adjusting to our presence, or warning us to leave. I wanted to believe it was just the groans and pops of an old structure settling down, but there was something else. Something that made the air around us seem heavier, more charged. It was at that moment that I realized, perhaps too late, that our search for a new beginning had brought us much closer to the end. It wasn't long before Emma began to notice strangenesses that I couldn't simply ignore. It was as if the house had a will of its own, moving objects around when we weren't looking and casting shadows that sneaked through the corridors. I tried to rationalize, to say it was the wind or that we were just adjusting to the new house, but deep down I knew something was wrong. It was on a grey afternoon, while exploring the attic, that I found a dusty diary hidden under old boards. The yellowed pages contained the story of a family who had lived in that house in the 19th century. The more I read, the more the atmosphere around me seemed to change, becoming heavier, as if those words evoked the very shadows that inhabited the text. The family members, one by one, met tragic fates, their endings marked by mystery and despair. There was something disturbing about the way their stories seemed unfinished, as if they were waiting for something or someone. The nightmares started soon after, so vivid and disturbing that we would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. We dreamt of the old residents, their pale faces and pleading eyes, as if they were trying to tell us something, to warn us. I tried to convince myself and Emma that they were just dreams, effects of the stress of the move and the renovation we were planning. But the truth was that something inside me knew it was more than that. The feeling of being followed around the house became constant for Emma. She said she felt a presence looming over her, watching her every move with an intensity that left her cold. I could see the fear in her eyes, and as much as I tried to be the pillar of strength we both needed, doubt began to creep into my mind. Were we really alone in this house? Or had we unearthed something that should have remained forgotten? Every dark corner of the house seemed to hide secrets whispered by the dead, every shadow a promise of terror. It was then that we began to realize that perhaps the house of our dreams was actually a nightmare from which we couldn't wake up. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbing nature of our new home revealed itself more and more. One morning, when I woke up, I noticed scratch marks on the doors and walls of the corridors. They were marks that I would have noticed before. Marks that seemed to have been made in a desperate fury. When I showed Emma, she went pale, and the silence between us spoke volumes of the fear that was beginning to take root in our hearts. The house, with its ancient stories and secrets, was becoming an enigma that, I confess, I dreaded solving. One night, we woke up to screams that seemed to come from the void itself. A sound so desperate and terrifying that it left us paralyzed with fear. We searched the house, checking every room, every dark corner, but we couldn't find the source of these screams. We were alone, or so we wanted to believe. It was that night that marked the point of no return for us. Fear had set in, and with it, the realization that something very wrong resided within those walls. My research into the house led us to discover stories of occult rituals that were practiced by the former residents, stories that made my blood run cold just reading them. The connection between the rituals and the unexplained events we were experiencing became clearer and clearer. Every object that moved on its own, every shadow that passed quickly out of the corner of my eye, now had a dark meaning, a reminder that we were not alone. The paranormal activity in the house intensified to a point where we could no longer ignore it or explain it rationally. Objects began to move on their own frequently, dishes broke without anyone touching them, and shadows seemed to move with purpose, as if guided by a will of their own. An evil presence, an entity that didn't belong in this world, was beginning to make itself increasingly known. It was as if, by discovering its past, we had also aroused its anger. We were trapped in a reality that challenged everything we knew or wanted to believe. With each passing day, the house seemed to close in on us, trapping us in its dark past and haunted corridors. And in the midst of this growing darkness, we began to question not only our safety, but our own sanity. The discovery of a secret room in the house was accidental, a result of our incessant search for answers. Emma, pushing a dust-covered bookcase in the library, revealed a hidden door that creaked in protest when opened. What we found inside was a shock, an altar, strange artifacts, and, most disturbingly, bloodstains that looked fresh. The air in that room was charged, heavy with an energy I had never felt before. It was as if that space held the darkest secrets of the house, and perhaps it was the key to understanding the storm we were living through. After this discovery, the paranormal activity intensified in ways we could never have imagined. Ghostly apparitions became a common occurrence, disturbing our days and haunting our nights. It was as if we had disturbed a hornet's nest of lost souls, all crying out for attention, justice, or perhaps just wanting to share their eternal pain. Emma and I, once skeptics, now found ourselves on the border of belief and despair, witnesses to a world we wished we didn't know. Communication with the outside world became a challenge. Our attempts to seek specialized help in paranormal phenomena met with inexplicable obstacles. Phones that didn't work, messages that were never delivered, as if the house itself was isolating us, keeping us under its control. We were alone, abandoned at the mercy of a force we didn't understand, an invisible enemy that manipulated our reality. The decision to confront the evil that resided in the house was made in a moment of desperation and determination. Armed only with our faith and an iron will to get our lives back on track, we prepared ourselves for the confrontation. Fear, although still present, had given way to a resolve that we could not live in the shadow of the terror we had discovered. Every shadow, every noise was now a call to battle, a challenge to our courage. We armed ourselves with everything we could find on purification and protection rituals, desperate for anything that could give us an advantage. The house, with its walls that once enchanted us, now looked like a battlefield, a labyrinth of fear and mystery. Our fight would not only be for our survival, but for our souls, against an entity that challenged our understanding of the world. And so, with heavy but hopeful hearts, we faced the darkness that we had inadvertently invited into our lives. The storm that hit us that night seemed like an omen, a physical manifestation of the maelstrom we were facing. With the electricity cut off, the house was plunged into darkness, a darkness that seemed alive, palpable, as if it were breathing along with us. The sounds in the house intensified, a chorus of whispers, moans, and footsteps that seemed to come from every direction. We moved around with flickering flashlights, our shadows cast on the walls creating grotesque shapes that danced around us. It was as if the house had woken up, every room and corridor animated with an eerie energy. Emma was dragged by an invisible force towards the secret room, her scream of terror cutting through the air like a blade. I ran after her, my heart pounding in desperation, fearful of what I might find. The door to the room, once open, was now closed, resisting my efforts to open it. Inside, I could hear Emma struggling, her screams mixed with a cruel, inhuman laugh. It was a battle not just physical, but spiritual, a fight for the soul of my beloved. In my frantic search for something that could help, I stumbled across old records and diaries that revealed the true history of the entity and its link to the house. The entity was not just a disgruntled spirit, but something much older and more powerful, summoned by forgotten rituals and bathed in blood and despair. With each page, the gravity of our situation became clearer, and the realization of what we needed to do to confront this threat took shape in my mind. The final confrontation with the entity demanded more of us than we could ever have imagined. The ritual we encountered, described in gruesome detail in the old diaries, was our only hope. It required a sacrifice, a terrible choice that would test the limits of our love and our courage. Heartbroken but resolute, I prepared to do what was necessary, to save Emma and banish this darkness from our lives. As we performed the ritual, the house was taken over by a chaotic energy, a storm of souls and voices from the past rising up around us. It was as if we were in the eye of a supernatural hurricane, surrounded by cries of agony and whispers of hope. For a brief moment, when the entity seemed to be defeated, a deep silence fell over the house, a silence that spoke of relief and a costly victory. But as the silence stretched on, a terrible truth began to reveal itself. Evil still resided in the house, more enraged and powerful than ever. The relief we felt at the conclusion of the ritual was short-lived. We quickly realized that the entity had not been completely defeated. Instead, it had changed tactics, infiltrating our lives in a more insidious way. The most terrifying manifestation of this change was when Emma began to act strangely, her eyes sometimes reflecting not the woman I loved, but something else. The realization that she was possessed by the entity we had tried to expel filled me with deep despair. Emma, my companion, my light, was now the manifestation of the nightmare we were trying to eliminate. My search for a solution became frantic, going through every book, every piece of old paper I could find in the house, looking for a way to save Emma and free her from the entity's influence. Every moment with her became a painful reminder of our failure and how our dream house had turned into a prison. As the entity's influence grew, the house turned into a labyrinth of horrors. Corridors that we used to know changed, doors closed on their own, isolating us from each other. It was as if the very structure of the house conspired to keep us apart, preventing me from reaching Emma when she needed me most. At every turn, I faced not only the fear of the unknown, but the terror of losing the person who meant the most to me. The revelation of a deep connection between Emma and the house, and therefore with the entity, was a devastating blow. I discovered, among the old records and hidden diaries, that Emma's lineage was intertwined with the history of the house, more than we could have imagined. This ancestral connection seemed to have predestined Emma to become the vessel for the entity, a plan that had been unfolding for generations. This discovery not only added weight to our situation, but also shed new light on the events we were experiencing. The battle we were facing was not just against a malevolent entity, but against a destiny that had been woven long before we moved into this house. With this new understanding, I prepared myself to do whatever it took to save Emma, even if it meant facing forces beyond my comprehension. The determination to fight against fate and the darkness that had taken hold of our house, and now Emma reignited within me with a fierce intensity. In the midst of the darkness that had taken hold of our home, the situation reached a new level of desperation when I realized the depth of Emma's possession. Her voice, her actions were no longer her own. They were directed by an evil will that sought to destroy everything we loved. In her eyes, I sometimes saw glimpses of the Emma I knew, struggling to return to the surface. But these moments were brief, quickly swallowed up by the darkness that controlled her. The pain of seeing her like this, so far away, was torture for my soul. Driven by a mixture of love, desperation, and determination, I began a frantic search for any means that could free Emma from that evil influence. Every ritual book, every piece of occult knowledge found in the house became a potential piece in solving the puzzle of her liberation. It was a race against time. Every second with Emma under the entity's control was another second of torment for her. And for me, the transformation of the house into a labyrinth of horrors was complete. Corridors that seemed to change direction, doors that led to rooms that shouldn't exist, everything seemed designed to confuse and isolate. It was as if the house, fed by the entity's energy, had become an extension of its will, created to prevent me from reaching Emma. Every attempt to get close to her was thwarted by supernatural obstacles, forcing me to face not only physical fear, but the terror of losing the battle for my wife's soul. The discovery of the deep connection between Emma and the entity was devastating. The revelation came from old diaries and hidden records, suggesting that Emma's connection with the house, and consequently with the entity, was something predestined, intertwined with the history and blood of their lineages. This connection explained the ease with which the entity had possessed her, as if it had been called home to Emma by a force beyond our comprehension. This understanding brought a new dimension to our challenge. We were fighting not only against an evil presence that we had inadvertently awakened, but against a destiny that seemed to have been mapped out long before we had dreamed of this house. Armed with this new insight, I prepared myself for what I knew to be the real battle, not just to expel the entity, but to rewrite Emma's destiny, to wrest her from the clutches of an ancestral curse that bound her to darkness. In my desperate search for a solution, an unexpected turn came when I discovered a way to communicate with the spirits of the house's former residents. Using an old Ouija board found in the attic, I began a shaky dialogue with souls who had spent centuries trapped within those walls. The messages were fragmented, but among them emerged guidance, a path to fight the entity that had consumed Emma. It was as if, in their own torment, these souls recognized our struggle and chose to help us find a way out of our shared nightmare. With the help of these spirits, I began to put together the pieces of the puzzle for the final confrontation with the entity. Every piece of information was a thread of hope, and following their instructions, I prepared a ritual that I believed would purify Emma and expel the evil presence once and for all. It was a risky plan, fraught with danger not only for me, but especially for Emma, whose soul was on the front line of this spiritual battle. The battle against the entity, using Emma as its vessel, was both physical and spiritual. Armed with the knowledge I had acquired and the help of the spirits, I faced the possessed version of Emma in a fight that tested all the limits of my strength and courage. Every movement, every word of the ritual was charged with the weight of our future, with the hope of freeing Emma and restoring peace to our home. It was a struggle marked by moments of deep fear, pain, and unwavering determination. The ritual, although dangerous, proved effective. As I recited the ancient words and performed the prescribed gestures, the energy in the room intensified, a storm of invisible forces colliding around us. And then, in a moment of terrifying climax, the entity was forced out of Emma, expelled in an explosion of light and shadow. It was a moment of indescribable relief to see Emma fall into my arms, free from the influence that had consumed her. But our relief was tinged by the realization of the terrible consequences of our victory. The entity's expulsion had left its mark, both on the house and on us. Emma was free, yes, but deeply affected by the experience, her body and mind exhausted by the battle she had fought internally. The house, our once dream home, now looked like an empty shell, a constant reminder of the darkness we faced. We had won, but at what cost? The shadows of the past still clung to every corner, a whisper that the battle may be over, but the war against the evil that inhabits those ancient walls was far from over. In the days following the entity's expulsion, the house returned to a state of deceptive calm. Although the visible signs of paranormal activity had diminished, the atmosphere remained imbued with a sense of alertness, as if we were in a temporary truce. Emma and I tried to start again, rebuilding our routine amidst the shadows of our recent fight. But every sound at night, every breath of wind through the cracks, reminded us of what we had faced. We were changed, marked in ways that words couldn't describe. Every laugh a little more forced, every moment of silence burdened with the weight of what had happened. Paranoia became our constant companion. Despite the entity's apparent defeat, we couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes were still watching us, waiting in the dark. The memories of our fight against the darkness were too vivid, leaving us in a permanent state of vigilance. Small incidents, such as the unexplained movement of an object or a passing shadow, were enough to rekindle the fear in our hearts. The house, once a symbol of our future together, now felt like a prison, its walls a constant reminder of our vulnerability. The discovery that the entity had perhaps not been completely eradicated came as a devastating blow to our already fragile sense of security. Small, almost imperceptible hints suggested that the evil we thought we had expelled had perhaps just retreated into the shadows, gathering strength. It was a terrifying realization, the idea that the battle we had been through could have been just the beginning of a bigger war, a war against a darkness that refused to be banished completely. The signs that evil still permeated the house became increasingly difficult to ignore. Unexplained incidents began to crop up again, each one an ominous reminder that the presence we had been fighting was far from defeated. We were surrounded not only by the memory of what we had experienced, but by the growing evidence that the entity was still with us, lurking in the darkest corners of the house, waiting for its chance to resurface. Our struggle, we realized, was far from over, and the fear that we might not be strong enough to face what was to come began to settle in our hearts. In our final attempt to escape the nightmare, Emma and I planned to leave the house, convinced that the only way to find peace was to get away from the source of our torment. We packed our lives into boxes, each object a reminder of the dreams we had for that place. But when we tried to leave, we discovered that all the exits were mysteriously blocked. Doors that refused to open, windows that seemed sealed by an invisible force. We were trapped. The house, with its walls that now seemed to breathe with a sinister life, refused to let us go. The realization that our imprisonment was much more than metaphorical sank into us with a crushing weight. Faced with the impossibility of escape, our determination turned to despair. The feeling of being trapped, of being a pawn in an evil game, became unbearable. It was then that we decided to confront the entity once again, armed with what little we knew and a thread of hope that somehow we could claim our freedom. This confrontation, we knew, could be our one last effort to defy the forces that sought to consume us. The battle that followed was beyond anything we could have imagined. The entity, now fully aware of our intention to escape, manifested itself with unimaginable fury. The entire house shook with its wrath, every room echoing with the sound of its cruel laughter. We fought with everything we had, every spell, every word of power we had learned, but it was like throwing stones against a storm. The entity's power was overwhelming, its shadows swallowing the light of our lanterns, leaving us blind in its darkness. The story ends in silence, a deep silence, the kind that speaks of an end, a conclusion. There are no more sounds of struggle, no more cries of despair. The house, our prison and our battlefield, remains, its walls holding the secrets of the night we tried to reclaim our lives. What happened to us, to Emma and me, becomes part of the mystery surrounding that old residence. We leave behind a story without witnesses, a cautionary tale whispered by the shadows that remain. The house is ready now, silent and waiting for its next victims, perpetuating its cycle of terror.